Let me start off with a hard question. What do you want in life? I know you have to answer out loud. It's kind of for you to process. But what are you going for? What is that thing that you want? And let me help you figure that out with some stuff. What do you daydream about? What do you, man, if I could just get here, if my job could improve, if my relationships could improve, if I could have some financial relief, right? We're not even saying like excess, just some relief. That would be great. If my business could be where it needs to be. Some of you want children. Some of you want your children out of the house. So there's all different stories here. We have things that we want in life. And now maybe some of us, we might be split because you already know what you want. So you're there. Like that was an easy question. It wasn't a hard question. Well, I know what I want. I want my relationships to be better. I want my money to be better. I want physically, I'd love to be better. Spiritually, I'd love to understand more of God. And so you can go through that very easily. For others in this space, it's, well, I really don't know. And that's okay. I think it's hilarious that we ask 18-year-olds to make a decision that's going to impact the rest of their lives. Hey, pick a major, don't screw up. You're going to do this till you're 65. So make sure you get it right. But we all of us, no matter our age, we come into that place where it's like, I'm not sure. Is that okay to not know? Yeah, that's okay to not know what you want. That's why we can change our majors. It's why we might change relationships. It's why even after years in a certain career field, well, I'm going to go in a different direction. So I thought I knew what I wanted. You ever thought you knew what you wanted and you got what you wanted and it wasn't what you wanted? That's the worst. Especially if like there's no other flavors out there and you got chocolate and it just goes right into ice cream, right? I thought I wanted this, but I got it and now it's not how I thought it would be. This was supposed to be it. This is what I wanted. And so all of us, we process that differently. And I love the diversity of this space because we're in different seasons of our life. And so what you want, it could vary based on your season. It could vary based on your experience. But you probably have a leaning towards something. There's probably something you're going for. It's what gets you up tomorrow. It's why you go to work. Because you need a paycheck to do something. For some of us, our jobs are transitional. For others, this is our career. This is what we wanted and we love it. Now, that's the first hard question. Okay, so what do you want? What do you want? Now this is the tougher one, okay? Is it the best? Is it worth it? Might think, all right, so fill it in. Here's what I want. It's just, I want a healthy marriage. Is that the best thing that you could possibly be living for? Is that what you're going to throw everything into? You get one life. So I'm going to throw everything into the best relationship I can find. I'm going to throw everything into the best career I could find. I'm going to throw everything into financial security, and I've got enough margin, and retirement's going to be good. And so I'm going to throw it all there. So I know what I want. I know what I'm living for. And now, is it the best? Is that the best thing possible for you? Now, I believe that God has the best for you. I do. I don't believe that God is out to ruin your life. Sometimes it feels that way, right? Like, really, God, can we let up? I mean, it's been a couple months, sickness, and my bank account exploded, not in a good way, and can we just let up? But I do believe that God has the very best for you. You as a person, despite what you believe about him, that's something that I believe, that God has the best for you. It doesn't seem that way all the time. So God has the very best for you. Is what we're leaning towards and what we're pursuing the very best that we could possibly get? How do we know? Wouldn't that be horrible? Come on, you built everything on this. You thought it was going to be a relationship and then it crumbled? You thought this was the one career. I mean, every expert said this is the one. You don't have to worry. Go to school. This one's going to pay off the bills and it's going to work out, and it doesn't. So how do we know? What can we use to help us know what we want and if it's the best? We're gonna find a tool together today. We're in our third week of Pray Like Jesus. 2 weeks ago, we started this series because I realized in the landscape of our world that prayer isn't a foreign concept to us. We all understand prayer in some capacity. As a nation, we rally around prayer. When tragedy strikes, when disaster happens, we run to something. And sometimes it's a national day of prayer, whether that's set up or called for. So we understand prayer, and we're taking our example from our parents, from our experiences, from maybe there was a religious teacher in your life. So we've all got this shaping and this definition. We asked the question 2 weeks ago, what if we learn to pray like Jesus? What if we let him be our example? What if we looked at the way Jesus prayed and what Jesus said about prayer, and we said, okay, what does Jesus say? Because let's just go straight to the expert. Let's just figure out what he says. So 2 weeks ago, it was really cool because we saw that when disciples of Jesus, followers of Jesus said, teach us to pray, Jesus said, when you pray, say, Father. And that's mind-blowing. We're not blown away by it because we have religious background on Long Island. But what Jesus was doing was he was inviting them into a personal relationship with God. Don't just think of him as distant creator. Don't just think of him as the ruler. You can call him Father. It's crazy. And you're all invited to do that. And then last week we saw that Jesus, in a moment of need where his present reality and his horizontal situation was not that great, the night before he would be crucified, Jesus asks God for something. We talked about how it's okay to ask God for things when you pray. These what do you want prayers, they're not wrong. And Jesus says, take this cup of suffering away. Translation, I don't want to be crucified in a couple hours, God. I don't want this. Can you take this away? But we learned through Jesus these 3 words that guard our hearts. When our present reality is screaming, God doesn't care, God doesn't like you, God doesn't like you, God doesn't... You ever heard that? Repeat, God doesn't like you, God doesn't like you. These 3 words that guard our heart, not my will, not my will. It enables us to remember that we have a Father who can do everything. And he wants us to ask him for things and trust him that his plan is great. So we've been working through this. And as we talk about prayer, there's another word that often gets coupled with prayer. And it's this word fasting. Are you familiar with the word fasting? Right, I'm seeing head nods, that's good. A lot of us probably are in some capacity. Fasting. Now, let me give you some examples of how we use fasting today in 2017. Anyone ever have to fast for blood work? It's the worst. Let's just say it's just the worst, right? Because you already are facing needles and certain death. And now they're telling you you can't eat beforehand. Right? So we can associate that, well, I can't have food because I'm going to get blood work. And so when you think fasting, maybe you go to medicine and medical and this is horrible and I don't want to do this. My daughter has needed a blood test for quite some time now, just like routine, like lead poisoning. Nothing we're too concerned about. But I'm just like, I don't want to do the whole blood work thing. Now she won't have to fast, I think. But we think about fasting with blood work. Other ways we fast is nutritionally. Now, we don't call it fasting, we call it dieting. Or we call it, I'm changing my diet. I'm getting healthy, right? January's coming. I can't wait for January. I stopped eating ice cream for like 3 days in January, and then I start again on January 4th. But we think about, well, I'm going to do this so that I'll feel better, look better. I'm going to tell my body, no, you can't have this. It's not what's best for you because that's what you really want. So we do nutritional fasting. Now, if you have a religious background, maybe you've tried what I'm going to call religious fasting. Religious fasting is when you're told by someone you can't eat this food because you're going to honor God for this time. So in our culture, maybe you've done that leading up to Easter, where you said, hey, for these 40 days, I'm not going to eat something. You had a parent ask you when you were younger, what are you going to give up? And you're like, I guess candy, I guess TV, I get whatever it is, I'm going to give this up because God needs me to give this up. And on certain days, we're not going to eat certain foods. And maybe you have that idea of fasting. What does that have to do with what I started with? I believe that fasting is a practical way that you can figure out what you most want in life and determine if it's worth it. So I think that what we're going to discover today through the words of Jesus is that fasting's purpose today is that it will help you determine who or what you most want in your life. So whether that's a person, a relationship, your finances, fasting has the ability to tell you what you most want. And then you need to do something once you figure out what you most want. You've got to throw that question at it. Is it worth it? Is that the best? Is that really what I have one life? Is that really what I'm going to spend my one life on? Fasting has the ability to do that for you. And this is important because you should know what you're living for. Some of you already, it's like, okay, I'm living for the weekend. Monday to Friday, get me to Saturday. Okay, so now let's throw a dart at it. Is that the best? Or if you know what you're living for, well, then fasting is just going to validate that for you. It will confirm what you are most living for. This is a really practical teaching today. This isn't concept. This isn't idea. Fasting. And when you leave today, I'm going to give you some resources that will help you understand fasting. We're going to read the words of Jesus recorded for us by a man named Matthew. So our screens are up. Thank you, Wind. And I'm just dropping things. Matthew chapter 9. I'll give you a second to turn there. Matthew chapter 9. We're going to read verses 14 and 15 together. Matthew was a tax collector called to follow Jesus. That's important. Matthew was a traitor to the Jewish people. The Jews hated Matthew for his occupation, for how he sided with Rome. And one day Jesus says, hey, Matthew, you follow me. Hey, Matthew, you're going to be one of my guys. Hey, Matthew, come follow me. It's crazy that Jesus did that. So we like to think, well, I'm disqualified from following Jesus. Matthew followed Jesus. And Matthew later in life wrote down everything he heard, remembered, saw about Jesus for us. So this is the account of Jesus as seen by Matthew, the follower of Jesus, recorded for us to read 2017. Let's stand together. Matthew chapter 9, verses 14 and 15. And if you would, read it with me. One day, the disciples of John the Baptist came to Jesus and asked him, why don't your disciples fast like we do and the Pharisees do? Jesus replied, do wedding guests mourn while celebrating with the groom? Of course not. But someday the groom will be taken away from them, and then they will fast. You may be seated. Confusing. Jesus is confusing. If you ever read the words of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John about Jesus, Jesus is famous, in my opinion, for getting asked the question and responding with nonsense at first. It's like, what, Jesus, what was that? I don't understand. So we're going to try to understand that. But John's disciples come and ask Jesus about fasting. John the Baptist. And that's not John the Baptist because there was John the Presbyterian down the road. This is one laugh, pity laugh. Thank you, Mike. Ralph's not here, man. Ralph's in Florida. Ralph would have given me a strong laugh. But John the Baptizer, John the one who baptizes people. Now, coincidentally, John happened to be the cousin of Jesus. So I don't know what happened at family game night a couple nights before. I like to imagine things that they were sitting down and playing a game of Monopoly, and Jesus won. All right, in my opinion. And John sends his disciples a couple days later to kind of do a little probing at Jesus and his disciples because he's still a little upset about game night. This is not in there. That's totally Keith. But John's disciples get there, and it seems like a little family rivalry. Hey, Jesus, how come your disciples don't fast the way we do? We're the disciples of John the Baptist, John your cousin. Okay, so we're fasting. Your disciples are not fasting. Clearly, you're probably not, because if Jesus' disciples weren't, they would have followed the model of their rabbi. Okay, so we've got Jesus and Jesus' disciples not fasting, and we've got John, his cousin, who just lost the game of Monopoly, sends his disciples over to Jesus to say, why don't you fast the way we fast? And then they tie in the Pharisees, the religious leaders. Now, the religious leaders had a way of fasting. And apparently John's disciples were doing it their way. And so they've got some credit. And they're like, look, we've got this. The religious leaders got this. How come you guys don't seem to understand fasting? To which we need to understand what they're talking about. Because we have ideas. Blood work, nutrition, religion. What is the fasting that they are referring to? And what's interesting is the fasting that they're referring to is not the fasting that was mandated to them by the law. They changed it a little bit. You ever seen something change and become something it wasn't intended to be when it first started? Right? A relationship went that way. A business plan went that way. It's like we didn't think it was going to turn into this. So fasting had evolved by the time they have the conversation. So let me tell you what fasting was, as put out by God through a man named Moses. Moses, Ten Commandments movie, Prince of Egypt, whatever your visual is you need. This Moses, God tells him what fasting should be. So for the Jewish people, they were mandated to fast one day out of the year. It was on the Day of Atonement. This was the one day that was mandated. All Jewish people were going to fast. And the Day of Atonement was one day where a high priest would enter the most holiest of places in God's house, the tabernacle, the temple, and he would bring a sacrifice, and that sacrifice would symbolize the people's sins being forgiven. Now, the reason why God called for a fast during that day was it was a reminder that they were looking ahead. They needed a breakthrough in their situation. So all throughout the day, it's like, we're not going to have breakfast today. Why? Because later the high priest is going to go in and we need him to break through for us so that our sins are forgiven. It's been a bad year. It's been a pretty tough year. We need this. And it's lunchtime. We're not going to eat today. It's going to keep reminding us we need a breakthrough. The high priest is moving in. He's going to break through for us. He's going to go through and enter for us. So this was the idea of fasting. God established this. Now you might say, well, didn't they fast at other times? They did. But the idea of a breakthrough is what was associated with it. So there was a time when the Jewish people were facing genocide, and a woman named Esther called for the people to fast for 3 days. And all throughout those 3 days, what they would be reminded of is, we need God to break through in this situation. All right, we are going to be persecuted, executed, just done away with. We need God to break through. Daniel, another man, when he was taken into captivity by the Babylonian Empire, he fasted. So he needed God to break through in this situation. And it wasn't just Jewish people. When Jonah, a Jewish prophet, arrived at Nineveh, the capital city of the Assyrian Empire, some of you history buffs are like loving this. The rest of you are like, this is ridiculous. Capitals, the Assyrian Empire, when they heard that they were going to be destroyed, they called for a fast because they needed what? A breakthrough. Okay, I want you to keep that in there. They needed a breakthrough. So all throughout history, before Jesus arrives, the idea of fasting is we need God to break through for us. And the way we're going to remind ourselves that what we most want, what we most need as a breakthrough is through fasting. But when John's disciples show up, that's not what it was. See, somewhere along the way in Jewish history, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, decided fasting should be more. Fasting should change a little. They did some reading and some history, and they realized, this is what they concluded, that it was a Thursday when Moses went up the mountain, spent some time with God, got the 10 Commandments, got the law, and it was a Monday when he came down the mountain. And they loved Moses. In fact, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, often hated Jesus because they felt he wasn't as good as Moses. And so they realized how good Moses was and how God loved Moses, and they decided, well, if we can't really go up the mountain anymore because it's already been done, but maybe we could be like Moses and God will notice us if we start fasting on Thursdays and Mondays. They started a tradition. They made it a law. Every Thursday, every Monday, we will fast. Why? Well, because we think Moses went up the mountain on Thursday and we think he went down the mountain on Monday. And so here's our tradition. You have weird traditions like that. This Thursday, you're going to celebrate some weird traditions in your family's Thanksgiving. Right? If someone looked in the window, they'd be like, what in the world are they eating? Well, this is just a family tradition. I heard a story about a child that always watched his mother cut off the end of a roast and put it in the pan. And every year she would watch her mom do this and just be like, why are we doing this? Like taking good meat and throwing it out. It doesn't make any sense. She started to ask around the family and understand, why do we do this? Finally traced the story back enough to when one mom, the OG mom, right? She cut off the end of the roast and put it in the pan simply because her pan was too small. and she could not fit the whole thing in there. But it became a weird tradition. Like, this is just what we always do. We throw out half the roast because this is just what we do. And if you don't do this, there's a problem with you because it's what we do. See, there's nothing wrong with your family traditions. What would be wrong is if you show up at my family's house on Thursday and tell me, you've got to do what we do because we do it. That's when you start impressing your preferences and your traditions on another person. So I'm gonna go ahead and be on the side of the Pharisees for a minute because I don't think they're villains. I really don't. I think that they loved God and they wanted to honor God. But what they did was they took their beliefs and their personal practices and they made them mandated. And so if you want to fast on Thursdays and Mondays, go ahead. But you saw what happened there when John's disciples showed up? How come you guys don't do it? And what happened is fasting that was associated with we need a breakthrough, I believe what it became about was bragging. I think it became about bragging. Hey, look at what I do. Look at how I fast. Right? You may have run into some religious people, whether it's fasting, prayer, Bible reading, giving, serving, whatever that looks like. You're like, man, just do it. Don't tell me about it. I don't want to know. Don't post about it. Right? But it turns into this bragging. And so John's disciples show up and they're, how come you guys don't do what we do? And then Jesus responds with that sentence. It doesn't make sense. We'll throw it up there about the groom. He kind of goes into this wedding analogy. Someday the groom will be taken away from them. What is Jesus saying there? We don't get it, but they got it. Because the original language that Jesus was speaking to them and the words he used, they would have understood better than our English rendering of this sentence. So what Jesus is saying is, Fasting was designed for you to look ahead for God to break through in your situation. You always were supposed to fast on the Day of Atonement to look ahead when that priest would enter in and God will break through and forgive you of your sins. And you've probably read about Isaiah and the Messiah. And you remember how God uses language through the prophets of a bride and a bridegroom. I'm him. And they would have like stepped back a little bit in fear of lightning striking him. That would have been the reaction. Jesus is calling himself God. He is calling himself the bridegroom, the groom of the Jewish people. He is saying in this moment, you've been fasting to look ahead to me. You kind of got weird with it and made it all about bragging and basically saying, instead of us look to God, let's get God to look at us. But I'm the guy. I'm here. I'm the one that you've been waiting for. So right now, while I'm here, you don't got to fast. My guys are not going to fast when they're walking with the guy who they were fasting for. Does that make sense, John's disciples? And they just look at him. But now what happens to us? Because it's 2017. Jesus ends with, someday the groom will be taken away from them and then they will fast. So then what do we do today? Do we throw away fasting? Does it not have a purpose? Do we go back to how it was used of God, I need you to break through? Do we use it as a way to brag and say, God, you should answer my prayer because look, I haven't had ice cream in 5 days. I just need my ice cream fasts. Or like, God, you should pay attention to me. Is that what we do? What do we do with it? And Jesus goes on in some more analogies to explain a new way of fasting. It gets weirder. Okay, so brace yourself. Next 2 verses. Who would patch old clothing with new cloth? For the new patch would shrink and rip away from the old cloth, leaving an even bigger tear than before. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, for the old skins would burst from the pressure, spilling the wine and ruining the skins. New wine is stored in new wineskins, so that both are preserved. Okay, Jesus, what did you have for breakfast? Because I'm not following. What Jesus is doing, let's not get too off with it. He's just talking about there's an old way to do things and there's a new way to do things. And sometimes the new and the old, they don't play too well together. Sometimes when we try to hold on to our past, we try to hold on to what we're used to, and we try to meet it with where Jesus and God is trying to take us to. The two don't play too nice together. And let me just sidetrack. Some of you in this place, you have a past and you have experiences and you have a story, and you're letting that define you instead of what God wants to define you with. And you're trying to bring your past into the future he has for you, and you're finding it's not going to play nice together. Because if you're going to keep living with the split identity of, well, this is what I did and God can't love me and he can't forgive me because this is what I did, and God's trying to tell you, no, you're a new creation. No, the old is gone. All things have been made new. They don't play nice together, right? And in the area of fasting, when Jesus is talking to disciples that took what was supposed to point to him, got turned it to God, look at us, Jesus saying, you can't. It's not going to work that way. There is a new purpose behind fasting, and it's not to look ahead, it is to look back. And you can't have both. There is new wine. There's new cloth. And so what you've got to decide today is if you fast and when you fast, is it going to be about you looking for God to break through in your situation? Is it going to be about you coupling it with prayer and saying, you know what, if I fast, maybe this prayer will get answered because then God will notice me? I'm bragging, I'm bargaining. Or are you going to fast to remind yourself of the day God already broke through your situation when Jesus broke through the grave? Jesus already conquered what you're going through. Jesus already took care of your biggest situation and your biggest mess. And this new wine is so different in that we don't use it as a bargaining chip with God. Well, I'm going to fast and you're going to have to answer and you're going to pay attention to me because look, I haven't eaten in 30 days. And so you're going to do something here, God. You're going to get your act together because look at what I'm doing. You got to change the motivation, and it's subtle. You know that motivation is subtle. You can accomplish the same goal with different motivation, get the same result, but if the motivation was different, the process was different. You know that about work. If you have to or you want to, same paycheck, same result, totally different week, totally different process. There's a quote I want to read to you by a pastor. His name is John Piper. I love the way he puts this. The new wine of Christ's presence demands not no fasting, but new fasting. The new fasting is based on the mystery that the bridegroom has come, not just will come. The new wine of his presence calls for new fasting. I love that language. Let me explain that. See, Christian fasting is very different than blood work fasting, than nutritional fasting, and then religious fasting. Christian fasting, when Jesus is at the center of your life and the gospel has changed you, that's very different than, well, I have to fast because the calendar calls for it. Or I have to fast because I have a really bad situation and I figure fasting is just another tool in my belt that I'll pull out and God's going to respond. Christian fasting is new fasting because we understand the bridegroom has already come. He's already changed our situations and our lives. Okay, so let's rewind. What does that have to do with what you most want in life and throwing a dart at it? When you empty your stomach, when you empty yourself of that, and it may not be food. I'm going to talk about some different ways you can fast. But when you empty yourself of what you need, when you do that, what rises to the top, use some imagery here, what rises and comes out is actually what you most want in life. You've seen this. When someone gets hungry and it turns to anger, right? That's hangry people. Amen. All right, I'm there. Right? So that comes out. Now there's an emotion that's present. That's not what I'm talking about. What do you go to in that moment that's going to bring some relief from that emotion you feel? That's what you most want. So you can use fasting in that way. It's a new way to fast. Okay, I'm going to deny myself food. I'm going to deny myself social media. I'm going to deny myself something that I need so that I'm allowing everything to be emptied and something that still exists to rise to the top. What is that thing? And you get really hungry and suddenly you have thoughts of lust or anger or greed or whatever that looks like. Okay, you've got to meet that with something. So what am I going to meet it with? I'm just going to think about my relationships. That makes me feel comfortable. Okay, that's what you most want in life. It brings some ease. Well, I'm going to forget this and I'm going to Netflix binge. I'm not even going to think about my stomach. Okay, well then you are leaning into comfort. That is what you most want because that's what helps you get through a hard situation. Okay, I'm going to fast, and when I'm feeling that, I'm leaning into the work of the bridegroom. Okay, Jesus is who you are living for. He is your sustenance. He is who you need. Fasting has the ability to do that. And when that thing rises to the top and you realize it's a career, it's a relationship, it is comfort, it is power, it is security, it is approval, whatever it is, you throw your dart at it and you say, is it worth it? Will it last? Can it be morbid? Your relationships aren't going to last. My relationship with my wife will not last. You know why? Because we each have an expiration date. And so if I throw everything into my marriage, I'm throwing everything into something that literally has an expiration date on it. Throw it into my kids, same thing. Throw it into my business, same thing. Throw it into the approval of others, same thing. It all has an expiration date. But I'm telling you, when you fast and you allow that to be emptied and something to rise to the top, you see what you most want. I most want my career. I most want family. I most want children. I most want money. You let it rise to the top. You throw a dart at it and say, okay, so if I don't get that thing, what happens then? Is it a sure thing? Is it an anchor? Or am I looking back to the bridegroom that has already come? He's already come. That's why we know he can come back, because he's already come. So we're looking to a sure thing. We're looking to a sure place. So are you living for what is absolutely best for you? Do you know what that is? And if you know what that is, will you fast to confirm that? Hey, just try it. This is a suggestion to you. Just try it. Try denying yourself food for some period of time. See where your thoughts go. I'm telling you, it'll work. It will work. Your thoughts will start to drift in a certain direction when you have no food in your body. And where your thoughts drift is what you are most wanting. Then you ask, is that worth it? Is that really what I'm going to spend my one life on? Now, let me pause for a second. If you're in this space and you're not a Christian, this should sound crazy to you. Okay, that's not sarcasm. That is an absolute truth. Because the reality, what John's disciples were showing up and talked to Jesus, and what Jesus, the bridegroom, showed up and said, is an understanding that he is all you need. He is the Messiah of the world. He is the Savior of the world. And so as you're sitting here and you're hearing of people potentially saying no to food to confirm Jesus is who I most want and most need in my life, it should sound a little bit crazy. But the beauty with the crazy is that you're invited to know that bridegroom. You are invited to know him and experience him. And whatever you're living for now, your next step is to consider, is it worth it? Come on, if it's not Jesus and I wouldn't call myself a Christian, then I'm living for someone or something, So maybe I'm living for me, maybe I'm living for him, maybe I'm living for her, maybe I'm living for my job, maybe I'm living for food, for pleasure, for comfort, for the weekend. So is it worth it? And I believe your best next step is to grab one of those gray cards, a step card, and there's a spot that says Discover Jesus. Because if it's not Jesus that you're living for, you are living for something that has an expiration date. And that's just the reality that you can understand when we stop having a battle in your mind. Okay, so when you've got a clear head, you're not fighting me on this, think about it. What you're living for has an expiration date. I know that what I could live for could have an expiration date. That's why I need to, the power is just crazy today. That's why I need to regularly fast. Rachel's losing her mind back there. Everyone's staring point. Don't do that. That's like a production team's worst nightmare. That's why many people don't join the production team. I know that what I could live for could have an expiration date. I know that fasting enables me to check my heart and say, wow, somewhere you drifted. So right now you're getting really angry. And you're starting to think about your job, you're starting to think about your family, you're starting to think about how you just wish God would show up and you would have more money. And God, I'm doing this so you would heal him. Okay, well then what you want is a healing for that person. That's great. See, that's the scary part. All the things I've listed, if you notice, not one is bad. It is not wrong to have a relationship. It is not wrong to want kids. It is not wrong to want finances. It is not wrong to want to be healed. That's the scary part of it. Because we're living for things that aren't wrong, but we're still living for things that are not supreme and they're not God's best for us. And in the end, we will be let down. So fasting. Jesus fasted. So what if we considered fasting as a means of exposing what's in our lives? Christians, why do you fast? And it's different. I tell you, I've had experience with fasting. And if I were to identify which one I would fall into, breakthrough, bragging, or being blessed by Jesus, I'd probably fall into breakthrough most in my life. Where I've said, you know what, God, I need you to intervene in this. There's something going on. And so I'm going to fast, and you're going to show up. And then God doesn't show up, and then I get mad at Jesus. Look at that, God. I said no to food all day, and you couldn't do this? Really? That's breakthrough fasting. That's done with. I'm going to brag. God, you're going to notice me. I'm going to fast, and you're going to have to notice me. All right, that's done. God, I'm going to fast to remind myself the only person worth living for is the bridegroom. Amen. I am going to live for him, and I'm going to expose whatever junk's still in here. Can I tell you what's going to happen? Junk's still going to be in you. This is a tool you use to expose the junk. And what do you do with the junk? You bring it to Jesus. Okay, now I've got it up and out. Okay, I'm really living for myself. I am really living for my career. I'm really living for relationships. And so Jesus, you take this because you are the bridegroom, and I want you. That's different. So here's what we're going to do. If you say this is your church and you've been coming here for a while, we are going to fast together the first week of January 7th to January 13th. Now, let me pause. If you feel pressured into doing this, there's a disconnect. Because this isn't about something you have to do. You shouldn't feel pressured into doing something. You shouldn't feel guilted into doing something. That's religious fasting. So this is an opportunity that we as a church are going to take. If you want to start off your year with exposing the junk that's in your life and redirecting your heart to the bridegroom. So when you leave today, you're going to get these cards, the fast lane. And on the back, there are options for fasting. Now, this is a disclaimer, so you don't sue me, okay? You all know what's coming. I'm not a medical professional. And honestly, if you're going to consider fasting food or water, you need to check with your physician that sees you regularly so you don't sue me. I love this church. I love my family. I will not be sued by you. We're not recording right now, but we will re-record once the sound comes back on. That will be thrown out there. But on the back here, there are some options because I tell you, my heart as your pastor, I would love for every single one of us in some capacity to say, you know what, I'm going to take a week or I'm going to take a day, I'm going to take whatever it is just to allow God to show me the junk. Not breakthrough. I know you want to break through in 2018. I do too. There are big prayers I have. But what I want fasting to do is I want it to expose, are you living for that or are you living for Jesus? Are you okay if that doesn't happen? Are you still okay if the bridegroom being your everything? Okay, so that's what fasting is going to gear our hearts as a church to start off the year and say, Jesus, we just want you. We want you for Flanders. We want you for our family. We want you for all people around us. We want you. And so there are some options here. There's a liquid fast where you give up all solid foods and you'll still do juices and you'll do sugary drinks and you won't get so hangry at the people you love. There's a Daniel fast where you'll just do fruits and vegetables. We see that the prophet Daniel I talked about, he did a fast like that for a season. There's a media fast. Some of you guys, this is where you need to live. Like, you know what? For 7 days, I'm giving up media, social media, Netflix, binging, all of that. I'm just going to see what happens when I have that spare time. Where does my thoughts go? But when I give up, you know the average is 2 hours a day on social media right now? 2 hours. I love when people tell me they don't have time to read books. Right? 2 hours on social media. That's average. So, okay, I'm going to give up that time, and during that time, I'm going to see where my thoughts go. I'm going to see what comes up out of me. Do I get angry because I can't watch something? A full fast, giving up solid foods and drinks, just water. A lunch fast. This is cool if you want to just fast over lunch for those days. Maybe it's going to be breakfast. Maybe it's going to be dinner for you. And a Wednesday fast, because January 7th to the 13th, that Wednesday, we're going to have a special time of prayer here. So all of our hungry cells are going to gather in here, and we're going to look to the bridegroom as our sustenance. Now, I give you all of this because I read a quote that said, fasting without a purpose is just going hungry. So you need a purpose. You need to not just, okay, well, I normally don't eat breakfast and lunch anyway, so sign me up for that one, because I already do that. That's just going hungry. Right? You need a purpose in this. You've got to say, I want to know at the beginning of 2018, who or what am I living for? Am I living for the bridegroom? It's a new way to fast. I'm excited for it. I'm excited that you're here to hear this, and we're going to have these cards available to you today, and as we get closer to January 7th, that first Sunday of the year. And so I want you to just take a card today, and I want you to consider. Maybe you're going to know, you say, you know what, I want to just try this tomorrow. I want to try it on Wednesday. I just want to try giving up a meal and seeing where my thoughts go during that time. Who or what am I most living for? It's a new way to fasting. Don't try to mix it with the old. It doesn't work. It's a new way of fasting. Let me pray for you. Good Lord, thank you for this time together. I thank you that Jesus came to this world and he established something new. And it's not for a breakthrough. It's because he already broke through. It's not to get you to notice us. You notice us. You love us. Father, I pray for every person in this space that our hearts would be guarded as we take a step towards fasting, that we would not feel pressure or guilt, that we would not make it about us, and that we would be ready to expose the junk in our lives to your Holy Spirit. That as those thoughts and as those feelings and as those words come out of us during that time of fasting, we would take that to your Son, Jesus, and we would trade what we're living for what's best for us, and that is the bridegroom. Thank you so much for your love. In Jesus' name, amen.